Hi guys, this is Mike with TimeMojo.com, and I'm going to be doing another video review of Muzdang, who's playing 10NL Zoom 6 Max on PokerStars. Alright, so this first hand we get Queen Jack offsuit in the big blind, and I think the best option here is to squeeze. A couple of reasons. You see the small blind snap called here pre-flop. This is almost always just a really weak range that can't play back to a 3-bet. The pre-flop raiser took 12.5 seconds to raise pre-flop, which we know are weaker than if they take a little amount of time, so that's another factor in our favor. And not to mention that squeezing with 3 other people in the pot has to work a lot less than a normal 3-bet because we can size it just a little bit more, so mathematically it has to work a lot less. And I think they get a lot more credit because whenever you 3-bet someone heads up, I think there's a bit of an ego factor involved where it's like, oh, somebody's playing back at me and they're more inclined to 4-bet, whereas in this situation you're playing back at 3 other people and it just looks a lot stronger. So anyway, as played, our hero calls, and post flop he leads, which I actually kind of like because an 8 or higher except for a 10 gives us more equity to barrel the turn and possibly the river. And if we improve, there's a lot of implied odds there to get value from a 10 or just like a weaker pair. And this is such a dry board that it's kind of hard for our opponents to hit this. But the big problem here is this is a 4-way pot, and this is why I think we should just squeeze pre, because the odds of someone having something here, even though it's a dry board, are a lot higher than usual. So as played, our hero bets and gets called and raised, so that was just a little bit unlucky. I think this was a plus EV bet here, but just tough luck. So as played, I think it was fine from our hero, but I think a squeeze would have been a lot better. Alright, so on this next hand, our hero steals King 4 diamonds on the button. And this is kind of loose, I suppose, but there's one big underlying factor here. The big blind is a pretty big nit. He's running 18-14 with about an 80% fold to steal over a pretty decent sample size. So you can be stealing a wide range here, and it's important to realize that. That being said, the small blind ends up coming along here, which is okay because, we are in position. And we actually flop pretty well for our hand. The first thing I want to point out is that while we did flop middle pair, we do have a fairly vulnerable hand, and there are a lot of hands we need to get value from, like ace high floats, draws, and he does have overpairs in his range, but that's not all that bad because we can end up bluffing those on later streets. So our hero bets half pot here, which I think is a mistake. Because if you do want the option to bluff on later streets, your sizing on all streets needs to make sense. So if you had something here like a 2-pair or a set or a big overpair, you wouldn't bet half pot. You'd bet like 75%. So he bets half and gets snap called by this guy, which kind of instantly tells me that he's not overly strong. He's definitely in the ace high float, draw, weaker pair type range. And I think we need to bet again to give ourselves the chance to push him off of the hands that we lose to, which are actually pretty weak. And a lot of river cards will scare that range. And we need to make draws pay. So obviously, you kind of want the ace high floats to stay in and maybe give them a chance to bluff on the river, but I think that's too small a part of his range to not bet here. So our hero does something really good and bets about 70% pot, which I really like because it sets up for just like a lot of cool river situations. The villain ends up folding, which is totally fine, but I think a lot of players just end up checking back on this turn because they just want to get to showdown. But in reality, if you're doing that, you're not thinking about his range in its entirety. So keep that in mind. Alright, so this next hand, we get ace queen on the button, and we raise it, which is really good. And there's a tight player in the small blind, actually from the last hand that we just discussed, who decides to call us. So on this flop, we flop 2 overs and a double gut shot, which is nice. However, I don't think immediately running for a c-bet is good here. I think a better play for most people is to just check back, because this range, or I'm sorry, this board really smacks this guy's out of position range, and you're going to be facing a check call or a check raise quite a bit. So by betting, what you're doing is you're not, sometimes like if he raises, you should really be folding, and that means you're not seeing the turn card, which means you're not using your flopped equity against him. By betting, you're also bloating the pot for what's likely to be a stronger range than yours. So betting really does not accomplish much. However, if you are willing to bet multiple streets, I do not mind a flop bet. So our hero does bet the flop, and he ends up betting half pot, as you can see in the chat here. And this guy just snap calls, which is awesome, because that tells me, just like in the last hand on these drawy connected boards, that he kind of has like a pair plus draw type hand, or a draw rather than a really strong hand, because a really strong hand would take more time. So that being said, this is a really good card, because what it does is it gives the lower end of his range extra equity. So if he has something like pocket nines with a diamond, or like ace 10 with the ace of diamonds and hands like that, he's going to want to call again because he's got extra equity, and that gives us a chance to bet this street and the next. We also could have the best diamond here, so betting here is really good, especially after you bet the flop. And I would bet here around 70%, and he bets half pot, which again is bad, because if you are going to bluff, you'd be betting big on both the flop and the turn, and our hero bet half pot both times. So he's kind of just repping like what he has, which is just really bad. You don't ever want to do that. You want to rep better. So the river is actually kind of a brick, because this guy can't really have any eights in his range at this point. So I think this is a really good board to just empty the clip and bet 3 here, because I think he has a lot of hands that did not improve after improving on the turn in his range. And even if he has a jack, it's really hard to call 3 straights with a jack on this board. The only thing, though, is if he bets half pot again, a jack might just auto call, because he's like, oh, well, I'm getting such good pot odds, it's just a half pot bet. So this is why we need to be betting big, 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 because if we bet big on the previous 2 streets, a big bet on this river would be really scary, and ace jack would have a really hard time calling. So keep this in mind. I still think the simpler thing, you should just check this flop back, but if you are looking to be more aggressive, this is a really good run out to do so with this hand. So the villain, our hero checked back, and the villain ended up having pocket nines with the 9 of diamonds, which makes a lot of sense. He flopped decently on this board, just an open-ended straight draw and a pair. He turned a flush draw to go with his hand, which makes sense that he would just be quickly calling down, and most likely would have folded to a river bet. So had we bet, like 2/3, 2/3, 2/3, this would have been a pretty easy fold for him. So that'll be the last hand, because I like to keep these videos kind of short, just because I think that's best for the learning process. And I just wanted to show you guys the Time Mojo blog if you haven't seen it yet. There's just a lot of good articles here about just random things about timing tells and poker strategy. So make sure you stop by and see this when you get a chance. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you enjoy the video.